Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books number 61. The first book today is The Other Face of America by Jorge Ramos, 2000. Well, this book is a real eye-opener. It's about the experience of Hispanics in the United States. And, there's the issue of illegal immigrants, and I believe the majority of them are from Latin America, so they're Hispanic. And the Republican Party has been really against illegal immigrants, and this has led to Hispanic Americans being 90% of Hispanic Americans, according to this book, Jorge Ramos's book, are have a negative attitude about the Republican Party, and because many of them have relatives who are illegal immigrants, or they just have a sense of sympathy for them. And what's happening, the Hispanic population is growing in the United States through immigration and through birth, since they tend to have larger families. So you could argue that the Republican Party has to change course and be sympathetic to illegal immigrants to win the presidency. Anyway, the book talks about the experiences of Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominican Republicans, folks from the Dominican Republic, and the other countries in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and so forth. So it's an interesting book. And I have a Puerto Rican friend. When I see him, I say "Viva Clemente," because of Roberto Clemente, the great Puerto Rican baseball player years ago for Pittsburgh. And there's a lot of those guys are playing Major League Baseball, especially from the Dominican Republic. It's a very interesting topic, and this Jorge Ramos he's like a spokesman for Hispanic Americans. You'll see him on TV, on CNN, on Fox News, and so forth. He used to go at it with Bill O'Reilly on Fox News, because that's his people, and the people that he's pushing for, and supporting. Very interesting book. The next book is The Overton Window by Glenn Beck, 2010. Well, this is an interesting book. It's futuristic. It's set in the future. And it's set during a time when, in this story, it's a novel in which American democracy is either lost or will be lost. And I think it's an interesting idea, because democracy is based on respect. That everyone gets to vote, and then whoever has the most votes is elected to various offices. And the thing is, in reality, there is a lack of respect that people have for each other, and for different reasons. When all kinds of different reasons. People believe they're superior. When you're young, with boys, it's based on physical strength and physical courage. And that the boys think they're superior based on that. It's also based on how they do in school, and then with girls it's physical beauty, and then as adults it's often with money. People who are able to do well financially believe they're superior, and they think there's the idea, well, why should poor people get the right to vote? And then you have intellectuals that think, oh, I'm so smart. Why should the stupid people be able to vote? So there are all these things that are sort of conspiring to end democracy and to give power to either the wealthy or to intellectuals or whatever. So this book gets into this whole dilemma: rich, powerful, anti-democracy forces against American patriots. Can American democracy survive? Well, we'll have to wait and see. And so, anyway, I thought Glenn Beck, he's my big political hero. I really admire the work that he's done over the years. Very brave, good man. The next book is John Quincy Adams by Harlow Giles Unger, 2012. Well, I'm getting ready. Actually, next week I'm going to be filming talks on John Quincy Adams, the sixth president, and this is the best biography, really, about him. And so anyway, John Quincy Adams was the sixth U.S. president, the son of John Adams, who was the second president. Much of his youth was spent in Europe because his father, John Adams, was over there during the American Revolution trying to get French support for the war of independence and French naval support, and he was also trying to get Dutch loans. And then he also negotiated the peace treaty and then was an ambassador. So at any rate, John Quincy Adams had a very unusual childhood. He spent so much time over in Europe, in France and England. Actually, at age 14, he went to Russia as a secretary for the first U.S. ambassador because he could speak French, which was the language of diplomacy. Anyway, he as an adult, John Quincy Adams served as U.S. ambassador to 6 countries in Europe. I know England, France, Prussia, Russia, Holland, and I think maybe Portugal. He was U.S. Secretary of State under James Monroe. Very smart and very well read. He was a really intellectual. He had a lot of pressure on him from his parents, and he was able to succeed, become successful. He loved reading books. He was very interested in learning, and so for him, actually, a lot of the time he spent in Europe as a diplomat, he had time to read books on different topics, the ancient Greeks and Romans and so forth. These great thinkers, and he got married, and then he was a politician in the U.S., was in Congress, and then he was in 1824 he was elected U.S. president, even though he didn't have enough votes. And you could say there were two big mistakes you could say he made. One was actually becoming president when, Andrew Jackson received more votes, but not enough to win in the Electoral College. And I think if John Quincy Adams had been smarter, he would have said, even if the thing is he didn't really respect Andrew Jackson, and this was a weakness, I would say a weakness, when he had this problem. We all have this problem. And anyway, so he accepted the electoral votes from Henry Clay. And then, you could say even the bigger mistake, that after that, he appointed Henry Clay Secretary of State, so it had the appearance of a very corrupt bargain, even though it really was not. Clay, I guess, didn't like Jackson. He probably regretted his actions as well, because it kind of doomed his career. He never became president, and maybe he would have. So as president, John Quincy Adams was very unpopular because people thought, no, Jackson should have been president. 2 of his brothers and his 2 sons, all 4 died of alcoholism. So his 2 brothers, they couldn't handle the pressure that was placed on them. And then the same thing with his sons. Really tragic. He also John Quincy Adams had an infant daughter die in St. Petersburg, Russia, when he was ambassador there. Then when he actually left his wife to go to help negotiate the end of the War of 1812, and then finally he sent for his wife and their son, and she almost got killed traveling from Russia overland to Paris, France, because Napoleon was back in power, and a lot of France and Russia had been at war, and they didn't. And so there's a lot of French fellows died in Russia in that war. An awful lot. And then, so as she was traveling and crossed the border into France, so there were some French soldiers who thought she was Russian, and she almost got killed. Anyway, and then they left their 2 sons actually behind when he was appointed ambassador to Russia, and this really had a bad effect on them because they lost their parents for a number of years, when they were still real young. Anyway, after his presidency, he became a very effective congressman. Actually, he served in Congress for the rest of his life till the day he died, and he tirelessly crusaded against slavery. That became his great achievement in life. He was the leading crusader against slavery. He also helped establish the Smithsonian Institute. When a lot of guys wanted just to spend the money which had been bequeathed by this wealthy Englishman, John Smithson. And that's a wonderful institution which has promoted knowledge and preserved knowledge. John Quincy Adams is considered the father of American astronomy, a big promoter of learning. He was smart, strong, brave, and patriotic. An amazing fellow, John Quincy Adams. So anyway, I'll talk more about him next week. We'll probably do about 6 talks on him. The next book is Andrew Jackson, A Life and Times by H.W. Brands, 2005. Yeah, H.W. Brands is another one of the outstanding historians and biographers of American presidents. I really enjoyed this book. Andrew Jackson was the 7th President of the United States, and he had an amazing life. His father died before he was born, and his mother and siblings died when he was 14. Yeah, they had gotten sick during the American Revolution because of a flu, an epidemic. Jackson was born in South Carolina, but Tennessee became his home. As a young man, he moved to Tennessee with a lot of settlers moving west. And his mother and brothers died because of hardships from the American Revolution, and he had developed a very strong anti-British attitude because of that, which led to his strong spirit in the War of 1812. He became a lawyer as a young man and a congressman, but made his mark as a military hero, fighting Indians in western Tennessee, and then later in Alabama, he fought the Creek Indians. However, his big achievement was defeating the British in New Orleans in the War of 1812, actually in January of 1815. That was his great achievement because people were that's what the war was all about. We're standing up to the British and their abuses, and this was a tremendous victory for the U.S. in defeat of the British there. He also helped Florida become a part of the United States because he went in with a military force, because at the time Florida was a lawless, weak Spanish colony, home of renegade African Americans and Indians. These escaped slaves from the Deep South often would go to Florida and live with the Seminole Indians, and then they would go on these raids across the border and steal horses and steal stuff, and it was no good. Jackson went in and fought them, and that eventually, and that was the beginning of a sequence of events when finally Florida became part of the U.S. He again in 1824 he probably should have been president, but he lost, even though he had the most votes. However, he was elected in 1828 and re-elected in 1832, so he served 8 years. His military exploits created security, unity, and respect. Yeah, this was so important. There were problems with American Indians, and he defeated them to make the West, or what was then the West, the lands east of the Mississippi River, safe for American settlers. He also, and then of course, defeating the British in New Orleans, and then the Indians in Florida. He also fought the Nicholas Biddle and the corrupt U.S. Bank. Yeah, the U.S. Bank. So that was another saga. He was a strong-willed fellow. He overcame severe illness in his life. He also had lead poisoning from embedded bullets. Yeah, he was involved in, I think that was from a duel, one or the two duels that he had. He almost died from. He definitely had a temper. He was a strong-willed guy. He could lose his temper. He was very much in love with his wife. His wife was a very fine woman, and they really loved each other. And then during the 1828 election, see, the thing is, she had been married previously, and then they believed that she was divorced. And then when they got married, it turns out her divorce was not finalized. So they claimed that she was this evil woman and stuff like. It was really dirty politics. It was just a misunderstanding, and then they cleared it up and got married. And she was a good person, but all these terrible things that were said about her in 1828 really affected Rachel Jackson, and she died shortly after he was elected, and so this was really horrific for him. He lost the love of his life shortly after winning the presidency, and he didn't have her during his White House years. So this was really, really tragic. Andrew Jackson was patriotic, brave, honest, determined, hardworking, and inspirational. He saved the United States when the British and secessionists threatened our union, the Union of the United States of America. So I feel I'm going to be doing a talk on him relatively soon. Series of talks, probably 6 half-hour talks. So really an amazing guy, Andrew Jackson. The next book is Day of the Dog, a football memoir by Hanford Dixon with Randy Nierges, 2012. Wow, this is a Cleveland Browns book. And Hanford Dixon played for the Cleveland Browns as cornerback from 1981 to 1989. And he was a star player when the Browns were strong contenders in the late 80s. When they got to the AFC title game 3 out of 4 years, 1986, 1987, and 1989. So this book, he talks about those tremendous teams that he played on. And, the other cornerback he had on the other side was Frank Minifield. They were really, really good, both of them. He talks about Don Rogers, Bernie Kosar. One thing I got out of this book is that Art Modell, the owner of the Browns, it was too bad that when Marty Schottenheimer left Cleveland, and part of the reason he had some conflict with Art Modell, and actually Schottenheimer was the last great head coach we had in Cleveland, well, except for Bill Belichick, who had tremendous success later after leaving Cleveland. So anyway, it's too bad Art Modell couldn't. We were all impatient back then in the late '80s for the Browns to win a championship, and you have to be patient. And anyway, we lost Marty Schottenheimer because he and Modell couldn't get along. Hanford Dixon blames himself for the death of Don Rogers, who was a safety on that team, who died of a drug overdose, and that was a real loss for the team. He was a real fine player, and not only loss for the team, but loss of. Always sad when people die young. I'm sure a tremendous tragedy for his family. And Hanford Dixon invented the dog pound. It was he and Frank Minifield. They came up with this idea of that they were dogs, and that they were dogs, and fighting like dogs, fighting that hard. And then eventually there was this idea. They came up with the idea of the dog pound, so. I was in the Philippines one time, and this boy, I had all these friends at this park with my son, and this guy says, "Hey," he said, "Hey, dog," called me a dog, which in the old days that would be an insult, but apparently became a term of endearment to be called a dog, and it goes back to this. Actually, it became like an international expression, when it started with Hanford Dixon. As a term of being called a dog as a term of endearment among young men, originally among African American men, and then of course became part of global culture. So Hanford Dixon was a tremendous player for the Cleveland Browns. Really enjoyed this book. He played back in the late '80s, the last glory years for the Cleveland Browns. The next book is Martin Van Buren, The Romantic Age of American Politics by John Niven, 1983. This book is 612 pages, pretty challenging, and I didn't read all of it because there's just so much political detail. Martin Van Buren was the 8th American president, and so he was the chosen successor for Andrew Jackson, and he actually helped Andrew Jackson a lot. He came from very humble circumstances in Kinderhook, New York. I thought it was New Jersey. No, it wasn't. It wasn't New Jersey. It was in New York. He worked really hard and started as a lawyer. Very hardworking, smart, personable, patient, energetic, positive, realistic. He was called the magician for his political mastery. He was a fine judge of character. He was President Andrew Jackson's most trusted advisor, Secretary of State and Vice President. Elected, he only served one term. Elected in 1836, he was defeated in 1840 by William Henry Harrison, who was the hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe. And that was kind of the first really popular election. And there was also an economic crisis. Martin Van Buren was a political genius and contributed to our democracy. In 1848, he was the presidential candidate of the Free Soil Party. He opposed slavery because poor men avoided the slave states. Van Buren was a master of politics, the art of the possible. Yeah, you could say he invented the modern Democratic Party. People consider Thomas Jefferson the founder of the Democratic Party, but Martin Van Buren is the guy who created what it really is today. And in other words, and what he did was created an organization to get out the vote, and that involved newspapers and having rallies and meetings and so forth, and a lot of finding newspapers to publish positive articles about the Democratic candidates. And then having these get-togethers, these political meetings and so forth, and really keeping track of voters and really creating an organization. So Martin Van Buren, really forgotten guy, and he did a lot for our democracy, because this is really what we have today. These highly organized parties that have lists of voters and so forth, and try to influence the public through the media. Back then, newspapers. Now through television and the internet. The next book is Now They Call Me Infidel. Why I Renounce Jihad for America, Israel, and the War on Terror by Nonie Darwish, 2006. This is an incredible book, absolutely incredible. It was lent to me by my good friend Dr. Denko. The author is an Egyptian-American woman who moved to the United States at age 30. Her father was a top officer in the Egyptian army and led commando raids into Israel from Gaza, and was killed when Nonie Darwish was 8 years old. There's I believe, a street or a school named after her father. He's considered a hero of Islamic Jihad. He was, involved in military actions against Israel. Anyway, she lost her father at a very young age, and she grew up, and as a child, she was taught to hate Jews, Americans, and non-Muslims. And she had a very limited life. And it's very restricted, because that's how life was for women in Egypt, and probably still is in most of the Muslim world today. In the United States, she learned to love freedom, America and Israel, and to hate the evil elements in Muslim culture. She describes Americans as naive regarding these cultural problems with Muslims. Americans fund terror by buying Saudi oil. Saudi Arabia is the leading funder of terrorism, Islamic Jihad. And then the other issue she talks about is how you have, of course, there's a lot of Muslim oil money, Saudi oil money, Qatar, and so forth. And then they've been funding Islamic study programs in the U.S. and other countries. And part of this involves promoting hatred of Jews in the United States, promoting anti-Semitism, which is really, really bad. And she's an amazing woman, a powerful voice in the war on terror. We should listen to her. She actually went to Berkeley, California, was trying to tell her story. And the thing is, American liberals don't want to hear the truth. Now, some people who might be watching this would be offended, and I've been accused myself. I've read a number of books. I've been accused of spreading hatred for Muslims, and I'm not, and she wasn't. No, these are cultural things. If you're born into Muslim culture, these are things that you're affected by, anti-Semitism, and the status of women, and actually the treatment of gays, the attitudes about democracy, the attitudes about the West, about America, and so forth, and all these severe problems. Although I think it's really good that you have actually Muslims coming to Europe and to the United States, but we can't allow them. We can't allow anti-Semitism to grow unchallenged. I'm all for them coming to Europe, because once you leave a country, when you're in your country, you're limited by the culture, and you might be completely wrapped up in bad things, bad cultural things, and you don't really know it because it's all you know. If you go to another country, whether it's in Europe or the U.S. or other Western countries, then you see another way of life, and maybe you think, well, this is terrible what they're doing here, and you're still under this influence, but this is how God loves everyone, including Muslims. And so that's why I think it's good for Muslims to be in the West, for them to change. We all can, and there's good and bad in every culture. But I think Nonie Darwish is a very brave woman. She's, I think, been completely rejected by her family for the stand she's taken. She's become a strong supporter of Israel. And she went to a meeting where she spoke to Jewish women, I believe. And it was very touching, because you hear, and she realized, wow, these are good people. They're good people. And so the cultural, this is a cultural issue. And it's when you talk about a cultural issue, it doesn't mean you're promoting hatred of a people. No, you can hate elements of a culture. The way women are mistreated in Muslim countries, the way promote the hatred of Jews, this universal hatred of Israel, and the sense of and the lack of religious freedom, and the belief in the opposition to democracy. So anyway, it's all controversial and very, very interesting, and I think we need to have courage And since I learned about this, I've read Nonie Darwish's book and others, and since I started, I thought, well, I've had people accusing me of promoting hatred of Muslims, and it's not true. It's not true. I met an Iraqi guy the other day here, real nice guy, real nice guy. We should make friends with everyone, but we should not accept cultural evils, because all cultures need to change. America was a very racist culture. It was wrong. And I don't believe we really are today. Yeah, there's some racism, but not like it was before, where it was really, accepted. Racism was very accepted. And, for example, in the Muslim world, or many Muslim countries, the inferiority of women is practically accepted. Anyway, very interesting. The next book is William Henry Harrison by Gail Collins, 2012. It's a 125-page biography, short but sweet. The 9th U.S. President, William Henry Harrison, elected in 1840, died after 1 month in office. He got sick and died. His father, Benjamin Harrison, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. His grandson, Benjamin Harrison, became the 23rd U.S. President, I believe in 1888. William Henry Harrison came from a rich Virginia family. He made his career in the Army, fighting Indians in western Ohio and the famous Battle of Tippecanoe, Indiana, and in the War of 1812. He was the commanding general in the battle in Ontario when the famed Indian warrior Tecumseh died, which ended Indian resistance in the Midwest. The 1840 election was a lot of fun. Tippecanoe and Tyler, too. Log cabins and hard cider. The author, as a girl, she actually gave a talk on Harrison because he settled in Cincinnati. She gave this talk on Cincinnati, and at the very end of it, and her parents came. She was like 12, and I think it was like in some public park. And at the end of the talk, she said, "And he had a really big house." And then her father said, "Yeah, he had a really big house." And she said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Well, because I tore down the house." They weren't able to. It was on land that was taken over by the electric company in Cincinnati, and they weren't able to. They tried to move it, but they couldn't find enough money or historical interest. So Harrison was born in 1873. His family home's interior was destroyed by the British in the Revolutionary War. They set fire to the interior. His wife Anna bore him 10 children. He was governor of Indiana. He defeated Martin Van Buren in the 1840 election. Then there was this, one of the songs from the election was this, quote, "Let Van from his coolers of silver drink wine and lounge on his cushioned settee. Our man on a buckeye bench can recline. Content with hard cider is he." And there was the Philadelphia distiller E.G. Booze, who created election souvenir whiskey in log cabin-shaped bottles. That's where we get the name Booze. Harrison was in the Whig Party, and he opposed Van Buren, was the Democrat. And then there was a song from that election that the Democrats came up that was against Harrison. It went like this: "Hush-a-bye, baby, daddy's a Whig. Before he comes home, hard cider he'll swig. Then he'll be tipsy and over he'll fall. Down will come daddy, Tip Tyler and all." So that was an anti-William Henry Harrison song. Another one was, "Farewell, dear Van, you're not our man. To guide our ship, we'll try old Tip." So when I read this, I thought, there should be a 600-page biography of the guy they called Billy Harrison. It appears we're out of time. We're going to have to finish with William Henry Harrison next time. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you find a good history book to read. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.